Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Amanda Sosa, and I'm going to be presenting on the article Following the Narrative Using Data Visualization in the Composition Classroom, written by Shannon N. Fanning. So let's go ahead and start by asking, who is Shannon N. Fanning? Fanning received her PhD in Rhetoric and Professional Communications back in 2018. She became an assistant professor at Farmingdale State College in New York, and her teaching mainly focuses on writing for electronic media, advanced technical communication, and visual literacy. All of these three components to me and topics really emphasize an electric classroom and how to make your classroom a little bit more electric. Visual literacy to me is where we're going to be exploring data visualizations and how to implement them into the classroom. Fanning also presented her ideas to the Association of Teachers of Technical Writing and at conferences such as Accountability in Technical Communication. So Fanning is a well-informed and engaged scholar in digital literacy and how to implement digital literacy into your classroom through formats like data visualizations. A brief summary of her article includes this quote that I pulled from her text. Bringing data visualization into the composition classroom offers another technique to help students with comprehension. In fact, comprehension has always been a goal of data visualization. I think this is an important point to really emphasize here because comprehension is something that we as future educators want to achieve. We want our students to be able to understand the material and engage with the material. Fanning uses three main arguments for this point of comprehension. Data visualization provides a narrative function. She enforces the notion that using data visualization creates a better chance for students to remember the information at hand. And Fanning additionally argues that data visualizations allow students to make connections between different data, therefore finding relationships in efficient, effective, and easy ways. So why does this all matter? It matters because if we can create an engaging and meaningful experience for our students, then we're adding to their learning process and to their educational experience on the whole. And that is something that we would love to do as future educators, something that's positive, something that's impactful. Data visualization can be broken up into two subgroups. So we understand quantitative data visualizations in a more traditional format like charts, graphs, lines. I'm sure all of us right now could picture what that would look like or that we've had that information presented to us before in some way or another. We understand qualitative data visualizations a little bit differently because it presents information that cannot be measured. And that sounds a little bit ambiguous at first. So let's talk about what it means for information to not be measurable. It basically means that the work that we're doing in an English classroom is not numerical. So we're not really working with statistics and numbers on a grand scale. We're more so working with sentences, words, concepts, text. And that's what's qualitative about these data visualizations is that words can't really be measured numerically. Obviously, there's always an exception here or there, but for the most part, qualitative data visualizations is going to be what we as English teachers would be using most likely. So let's go ahead and take a look at this video. It's called The Art of Data Visualization. And I think they make a couple of key points in here that magnifies the significance of data visualizations. And they don't necessarily focus on how to use them in the classroom, but it is important to look at.
Truth is one of those ambiguous things that you can't really define and probably changes and evolves the more understanding you have. Data itself is a result of research, so I would say that data is just a clue to the end truth. I think a successful infographic tells a story. It communicates hopefully accurate and sometimes complicated data in a way that many people can understand. I think the first step usually is always dig really deeply into the data ourselves and find each key point and create a hierarchy and a narrative out of that story. When you start to merge different pieces of information and when you start to learn really what it's all saying, the narrative is clear. The one key fact that everything can revolve around is the hero of the piece. There's one single piece of data or insight that people respond to and kind of encapsulate the whole vision, and then invite people in to see the nuances and all the rest of the story around it. When you look at a piece, it's successful when it translates data from something that's complicated to something simple. When it communicates a message that otherwise would have taken somebody hours to digest and find in an instant.
All right. So one key point here that they talk about is translating complicated information into something simple. And I think that's a really important idea for us to elaborate on as future educators. We want our students to be able to understand the material. We don't want them to be discouraged by complicated ideas, by complicated texts. And so if we could provide them the opportunity through a data visualization to translate that information from something that was complicated, overwhelming, and a little bit scary to the student into something simple, something that they're willing to engage with, something that they're excited about, then that's very impactful, something that's important in our classroom for the student's experience and their learning process. Like he said, if it takes hours for you to even digest the information, that's taking away a lot of your time for critical thinking and analytical time that you could spend with that material instead. So the initial comprehension of the material can really be utilized with these data visualizations in a composition classroom. And then I also want to bring in literature classrooms as well, because I feel like data visualization can be used in multiple English classrooms, not just composition. So storytelling with data. Fanning previously mentioned, and we previously went over, that she believes data provides a narrative function. And in this sense, the video we're about to watch aligns with that point of view through these 4 main points. So the visual application of data, engaging with the information at hand, reinforcing the notion that data is a narrative, and building that network of communication. And I feel like the last point is really important for us as future educators, building a network of communication for our students to feel engaged with. And then again, let's go back to point number 2, engaging with the information at hand. We don't want to provide a 2-dimensional experience for students where they're just consuming the information in their seat and they don't take it outside the classroom door and they don't apply it to the assignments or even to assignments in their classes that are not yours. So if we can get them to engage with information that provides that longevity of understanding and interaction, then we're doing something significant. So in this video, she provides a couple of examples. I'll pause the video to talk about the first one, and then we'll go on to the second one. But with the activities that she is providing in this video, I think that it's important if we, as viewers, also do what she's asking us to do. So she has a numbers activity, and then she also has a visual activity later on that we're gonna do. So it's important to see how visuals affect our understanding and how visuals can be effective versus ineffective. So let's go ahead and take a look.
Let's talk a little bit about how people see to get into more of this how we focus attention. So here's a super simplified picture of that process. On the left-hand side, you have light refracting off a stimulus. This gets captured by our eyes. We don't fully see with our eyes. Rather, most of what we think of as visual processing takes place in our brains. Now, in the brains, there are a few types of memory that are important to understand as we're designing visual communications. We'll talk about one of them today, which is iconic memory. Iconic memory is super short-term. It's shorter than short-term memory, and information stays there for fractions of a second before it gets forwarded onto our short-term memory. The really cool thing about iconic memory is that it's tuned to a specific set of what we call pre-attentive attributes. So let's actually pause here and do a quick exercise. So in a moment, I'm going to put a bunch of numbers up on the screen. What I'd like you all to do, as fast as you can, is count the number of 3s that you see. We got it? We're going to count 3s. When you know the answer, shout it out. It is a race. You would like to win. Ready, set, go. All right, 6 is the correct answer. This took a bit of time, though, right? You'd physically read through these 4 lines of text, look for 3, which is kind of a complicated shape. Watch what a different exercise it becomes when I make one tiny change. Don't have time to think, don't have time to blink. Suddenly, there are 6 3s in front of you. This is so apparent so quickly because I'm leveraging your iconic memory. I'm using the pre-attentive attribute of intensity of color, in this case, to make the 3s the one thing that stand out as different from the rest. Now, this is hugely critical because what this means is our pre-attentive attributes, if we use them strategically, can help enable us to get our audience to see what we want them to see before they even know they're seeing it. Here are the attributes. I won't read through all of these, but notice as your eyes scan across the screen, how they're just drawn to the one within each group that's different from the rest. You don't really have to consciously look for it. Now, one thing to know about the attributes is people tend to associate quantitative values with some, but not others. For example, most people will consider a long line to represent a greater value than a short line. It's one of the reasons bar charts are intuitive for us to read. But we don't think of hue, for example, in the same way. If I ask you which is greater, red or blue, it's not really a meaningful question. And this is important because it tells us which of the attributes can be used to encode quantitative information and which should be used as categorical differentiators.
Okay, so I think a lot of what she's saying is very true for the classroom, even though the example she's giving is more so applied to quantitative data visualizations. So one thing that she points out is iconic memory. And the reason why I wanted to bring this into our class discussion is so that we can understand how these data visualizations will work with our students, why they're working with our students. So with understanding iconic memory, we can understand how the activity is physically affecting our students and what sort of brain reactions are happening when we present these data visualizations to our students in the classroom. Now, another question I really want to go over that relates to iconic memory is not asking ourselves only what we're doing in the classroom and what we're going to provide our students, but why we're doing what we're doing in the classroom and why we're providing these activities for our students. I think if we don't ask ourselves why, then we're not creating as much of an impactful experience and we're not creating as much meaning in the classroom as we could be. So it's important for us to not only ask ourselves what we're doing and what we're going to provide them as future educators, but why we're doing this. And I think iconic memory and creating this sort of tension between effective data visualization versus ineffective data visualization will provide us with that answer for why we're doing this. We're doing this to create meaning, to create engaging interactive activities for our students to really receive material and to also make meaning with that material once they have received that information. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to skip forward a little bit here, and she has some more activities for us as far as visuals go. And I think it's important for us to look at how she provides a contrast with visual reception. So what makes a data visualization effective versus ineffective? How can we create data visualizations that are as effective as possible for our students? So let's go ahead and go through some of these visual reception activities that she has for us so we could start to understand a little bit more of the technical dynamics that happen behind these visualizations.
A test I like to employ in trying to figure out whether you're using your pre-attentive attributes strategically, and that is the where are your eyes drawn test, where you look away from your visual and look back at it, or close your eyes and look back at it, and just notice where your eyes land first, because it's probably where your audience's eyes will land as well. So I thought we'd do this with a series of pictures and just talk about the implications for our visual designs. So I'm going to put a series of different pictures up there. When I put the picture up, just shout out where your eyes go first. Ready? Where do your eyes go first? Here. Stop sign, right? You almost can't look anywhere else at the onset because it's bright, it's red, it's got these big, bold capital letters. It's outlined in white, which sets it apart from the background. When I think about how you can use some of those cues when you're visualizing data to draw attention as well. Let's do another one. Where do your eyes go? Here. Yeah, if you're like most people, they go to the sun. But if you're like me, when you try to look at the sun, you get this plane sort of tugging on your peripheral vision. Or if I try to look at the plane, I can see the sun sort of wanting to pull me that way. So just be aware that when you're emphasizing multiple things in a graph or on a page, this tension that can be created in your audience. How about where do your eyes go? Here. Depends a little bit perhaps on where you're sitting in the room. A lot of people will be drawn to that perennial sale sign in bright pink because it's bright, because of the black bold lettering on it. And then most people from there will continue down and rightward. And that's because without other visual cues, we typically start at the top left of our page or our screen and do zigzagging Z's across. So in this case, that draw to the perennial sale was strong. So we started there and then continued on that Z downward and to the right. Notice that means we missed whatever was happening in the top left quadrant, and maybe that second and third quadrant as well. So I'm going to be thoughtful about the overarching designs of the pages on which your data visualization sits and take that into account. Just a couple more of these. Where do your eyes go? Here. Everywhere and nowhere, all at the same time. Right? Colorful is an awesome goal for a birthday party. Color is not such an awesome goal when it comes to visualizing data. When we make so many things different, we have a lot of stuff competing for our attention, which actually makes it really hard to look at any one thing. Check out the difference in how your attention is focused here versus here. Right? With the red balloon, the one thing that's different on the whole page, we almost can't not look at it. That is the power of color, specifically used strategically. Let's take a look now at an example from that.
Okay, so she provides us with what an effective data visualization would look like versus an ineffective data visualization. And I think that's a really important concept for us to understand, to not only be focusing on the pros of data visualization, but also on the cons of data visualization. We don't want to provide that tension for our students with the information that we're presenting them. We don't want to overcomplicate and overwhelm them with too many colors, too many concepts on one visualization. We want to use these visualizations so that we're simplifying information, not overcomplicating it. So I think it's important for us to understand as future educators that data visualizations are a great tool to use, but if we don't use them wisely, we might just be well-intentioned instead of impactful. And I think that's an important connection to make, that she does a really great job of explaining for us, that we want to be clear, concise, and have this information be well organized and not do some of the easy mistakes that we could make when we're making these data visualizations. So I think that's important to keep in mind as well when we are considering how these function in a classroom environment. So some key points about data visualizations is finding relationships. So how do data visualizations provide the opportunity to students to find relationships? Sometimes I think of this in terms of literary theory. I know we're talking about composition classrooms and communications classrooms, but I think that this could also apply to literary theory, because that's something that I particularly struggle with and sometimes struggle to make connections and relationships with when I am interacting with that kind of material in an English classroom. So let's go ahead and read two of the points that Fanning uses to describe this interaction. Data visualizations can also be used to help students make sense of difficult concepts and to find relationships between different sets of information. Experimenting with data visualization can help students to find relationships in both data sets and interrelated concepts. Visualization also helps students to make sense of difficult processes and helps to concretize concepts that are difficult to picture. So for me, when I read this, I thought of literary theory, because that is very difficult for me to picture, very difficult to make sense of and to process. And if we could provide if we could enhance these difficult experiences by simplifying them and allowing these data visualizations to provide the opportunity for students to find connections and relationships on their own, then we're doing something really impactful in the classroom, because it's changing how they're interacting with information and what they're doing with the information they're interacting with. So if they, as students, can find relationships and find these connections, then the data visualizations are working not only for them to comprehend information, but for them to make meaning with that information as well. And I think that's a really important point to touch upon. Secondly, I pointed out this quote. While tables are not always considered as data displays, several have noted their explanatory power and rhetorical effectiveness. Students can visualize elements of their own papers and compare them to expert papers or corpus data, learning to recognize expert patterns and incorporate these into their own work. Mapping out readings at the end of a unit as the next assignment tasks students to do can also help students to find relationships between different authors, chapters, and contexts. So again, going back to this idea of finding relationships between different concepts, different material, different information, but finding relationships and connections between that so that students are making meaning on their own, that they're bringing their own perception and their own knowledge into these interactive and engaging activities and finding meaning and finding a purpose for this information. And that is impactful and significant. Learning to recognize expert patterns, that's something very important as well. In English, especially in composition, when we're looking at rhetorical devices and rhetorical approaches, it's important to recognize patterns and repetition to see how that emotionally impacts us, logically impacts us, ethically impacts us. And so for students to be able to have this information very accessible and flexible for them to not only understand, but again, to make that meaning themselves, then I think that's a very interactive and engaging activity because what we want is for students to feel engaged and to not be two-dimensional with information. Because when they are engaged, they're going to get something out of it in the long term. They're not going to leave the information in the classroom. They're going to take it outside of the classroom and possibly even apply it in the other classes that they're in or in their day-to-day lives. So some main arguments for data visualizations that's important for us to really call attention to here is retention and recall and narrative. And that's touched upon in the video that we just watched as well. So she talks about iconic memory in our short-term memory, but also what she failed to mention, she mentions it later on in the video, but also how this iconic memory, short-term memory contributes to our long-term memory when it's done effectively. So in this first quote here, I have each student was randomly assigned one of 5 treatments: block word diagram, picture word diagram, text alone, text and block word diagram, or text and picture word diagram. Holiday found that students with either diagram type recalled information better than those who received the text alone. So again, my mind personally goes to literary theory, because when I am assigned a very long text that's just sentence after sentence after sentence, concept after concept, it's very difficult for me to retain that information. And at the end of the page, I often find myself asking, what the heck did I just read? I have no idea. And that is an ineffective learning experience for our students. We want to engage them with the material that they're reading and that they're being assigned. We want them to have a learning experience, not only on their own, but in a collaborative sense as well. So I find it interesting that with these diagrams, with these visualizations, we can provide that to students where they're not just interacting with a text and unable to retain that information, but they have something that's impacted them enough so that they can recall that instance, recall that information later on. And if they can do that, they can bring those ideas into other units, other concepts, and make those connections that we talked about earlier. The second quote that I pulled is, when I asked students for their opinions on inclusion of the visualizations in this assignment, the response was overwhelmingly positive. They said the inclusion of the visuals improves understanding and makes it more clear what is expected of us. One described the pie chart as a motivator for putting in a lot of effort on this final project, at a time in the semester when that motivation sometimes seems to fade. So the context for this particular quote that I pulled was that Fanning used data visualization to describe an assignment. So I think that's another interesting way to look at data visualizations. It's not just presenting information of text they've read, but it could also be presenting information for an assignment that they're going to be working with in the future and how to present that information. I'm sure all of us have had at least one experience where we've read a prompt or read an assignment that has been assigned to us and have been confused. So if we can eliminate that confusion or minimize it so it doesn't interfere with their learning experience and with their comprehension, then we're doing something really positive in the classroom and really positive for an individual student as well. It's interesting to say that it's a motivator, that having these visualizations motivates students to be more interactive with their assignment, and that it improves their understanding and makes it clear what's expected of us. If we can make it clear what we want our students to be doing with their assignment, then we're being effective in our teaching strategies and with our techniques and tools. If we can motivate them with these visuals, that's even better. And that goes to show how students are positively reacting to these assignments and to this information when it's presented with a data visualization. And so when we are thinking about our future classrooms, like I said, we're not only asking ourselves what we're doing in the classroom or what assignments we're going to be giving our students in our classroom, but why these assignments matter, why these assignments are being done in our classroom. And if we can go back to retention and recall, that is an important motivator for us as future educators to use data visualizations. If we can promote this recall and promote this retention, then we're doing something that's going to have some longevity with our students. Now, since we're all English majors, we should go on and talk about narrative. So in understanding data visualization as narratives, we not only begin to become aware of the ways we can use them in the classroom, we also begin to see the place, the belonging they have there. So data visualizations tell a story, and that's one thing you'll often find if you watch any videos or read any articles on data visualizations. A lot of the scholars that are engaged with visualizations constantly talk about narrative and telling a story with these visualizations, whether it's a quantitative data visualization or a qualitative data visualization. The narrative part is what speaks to the students. The narrative part is what speaks to the audience. And so if we could create that story, if we can create that dynamic, then again, it's going to be personable for the student and engage them in that material. The second quote I have here is Edward Siegel and Jeffrey Heer. Address the connection between data visualization and narrative directly, noting that data visualization evokes comparisons to storytelling. Nahum Gerson and Ward Page claims that stories and visualization design share a common goal: to communicate information in a psychologically effective format. And as future educators, again, we want to call back our attention to psychologically effective format. So we want to be effective and we want to communicate information in effective ways. We want this to be comprehensive. So let's go back to the first video when they talk about making complicated information simple. That's an easy way for us to share this common goal, to communicate this information to our students. We want our teaching practices to be effective. And if we could do that by having a visual reception of this information, then our students are gaining something from it. They're not just listening and leaving that information. They're again engaging and interacting. And I think those are two main ideas here that we should continuously talk about when we're thinking of data visualizations, is student engagement and student interaction. Again, we go back to collaboration and participatory culture, and we want to facilitate that in their classrooms so that their learning experience is enhanced, that they get something out of it, that it's meaningful. And by having that recall and narrative, we can provide that to our students through these visualizations. All right, so are you guys ready to jam? So let's stop and take a moment to write down any questions, comments, vocab words, or word vomit that comes to mind. I've posed 2 questions on our Jot and Jam boards so that you could respond to or use the information to inform your own perspective of data visualization thus far. You can also turn on your microphone if you want to verbally collaborate with your peers during this process. I'm gonna have my microphone on. I think that's a really great way for us to collaborate. Of course, don't feel any pressure to do that if you don't feel comfortable doing that, but just know I'll have my microphone on, so if you want to collaborate with anyone, at least you'll have me. I have 2 questions on 2 different boards. So this link is going to have slide 1 and slide 2. There's 2 different questions there, and I would really love if we interacted with both questions. I'll go ahead and pause this video right now and give us about 5 minutes or so to jot and jam, and we'll briefly go over a few posts, but we'll mainly be using our jot and jam board to reference our ideas during an upcoming small small group activity. And what I mean by small group activity is not necessarily in an organized format. The last slide that I have here is really just talking about and going over some of the ideas that we have here in a collaborative, informal discussion. So don't feel pressure about a small group activity or anything. It's more just a collaboration. So we could really go over these ideas that we're jotting down right now. So I'm going to go ahead and pause here, and then we'll go ahead and reconvene in about 5 minutes or so. But if we need more time, that's totally fine as well. Okay, welcome back. That was really fun to do the Jot and Jam with everybody, and I hope that it created a meaningful experience for everyone as well. So let's talk about approaching the classroom. Since we know more about data visualizations and their subcategories of qualitative and quantitative, let's consider what this would look like for students in their classrooms by looking at some examples of qualitative data visualizations. So we talked about how quantitative data visualizations are going to be graphs, bar charts, line graphs, etc. And we're all, for the most part, familiar with what that looks like. But when you think of qualitative data visualizations, it might be a little bit more unclear of what this is going to look like and how you could approach the classroom with these visualizations. So while we go over the next few slides, let's consider how we as future educators could implement these qualitative data visualizations. Try to think about what topics you think would work best with certain approaches, or which ones you think might be ineffective as well. All right, so the word cloud. So this is a great activity for students. What you do here is everybody submits a word for whatever topic that you're presenting on that day. And this digital visualization basically creates a word cloud and magnifies the words that show up the most. And the reason why this activity is important and how it can impact the classroom is because it shows repetition. And with repetition, we can go ahead and see what concepts keep coming up for us, what vocab, what words are really important for whatever key topic, central idea that we're working with in the classroom on that day. Next, we have a word tree. So this word tree right here, it starts with, should I buy the car? And this is more of like a decision word tree. It doesn't always have to be a decision word tree. You could obviously choose whichever topic you would like as the educator. But you see how one concept branches off into two concepts, and those two concepts branch off into two concepts, two concept, two concept. And we see how these ideas grow. The other day in class, we talked about drafting ideas through a Twitter thread. And I think that this sort of reminds me of that, of having one thread and that thread being branched off of, and students brainstorming and branching off of one idea into another idea, into another idea. And soon they have this word tree of all these great ideas and concepts that they have to visually show them what's going on in their head, to visually show them what they want to do with this topic that you've presented to them. And I think that this is a really great tool to provide conceptual understanding and perhaps how to approach critical thinking activities and analytical activities as well. Next, we have mind and project maps. So this is also a very visual resource. It reminds me a little bit of the word tree that we have here before, with starting with one main idea, which here is resources, and starting to branch off. I like how they use color here, how resources goes to four main ideas, and that's contact information, logos, documents, important links. So what we could do in a composition classroom with an activity like this is start with rhetorical devices and branch off to ethos, have another branch off to logos, and have another branch off to pathos. And then from those, you now branch off into whatever ideas is in that class discussion, or whatever ideas is in whatever speech or YouTube apology video that you're doing that day. And this is another visual representation of not only what's going on in their mind, but also a collaborative experience that provides them with more information, more comprehensive information. So it's not as intimidating to just revisit a text and try to look through what sections you highlighted. But you have a visual display of how certain ideas branch off into other ideas and what examples can be provided for that. And so with this visual project map, you're mapping out these sort of concepts. And Fanning also talks about that in her article as well, but she does not show a project map in this way. But she does talk about mapping out ideas, which I think is important. So now we have a comparison diagram. So I'm sure we've all had to do a Venn diagram in some way or another. So these are not specific to elementary school. These can also be utilized in a college composition classroom or a college communications classroom. So here we have an example of raising a baby versus a fur baby. I think this topic is hilarious, so I loved to include it in the slide here. So on the left-hand side, we have stock up diapers, tends to cry frequently, may cause sleep deprivation. And then on the right side, we have stock up on poopy bags, tends to chase or bark, and may destroy your belongings, i.e. shoes. And now in the center here, we have a very visual representation of all the similarities these have. So of course, when we're considering an idea like a baby versus a fur baby, we might start to draw upon these conclusions, but now we could go ahead and see the patterns that happen with both of these topics. What do they share? What don't they share? And this visual representation is an easy way to organize that information so that students can interact with and engage with this material. So you could use pictures like is shown here, or you could use just that wording with the visual as well. And it all depends on whether or not you're using computer software or if you're doing this on paper. However, you're formatting this activity, it's important to recognize that the significance of this activity is by visualizing what's different and visualizing what's the same. And that's visually separated. And then we have here in the center what's connected. And instead of writing connections, we see that these are the connections because this is the area of the visualization that this information is presented. So that is one way to approach this sort of information. We also have a hierarchy chart. So this example I pulled from Fanning's article and how we can approach information in the classroom. So she goes from introduction to literature review to another literature review, and then she branches off as well. So this is another way to organize information visually so that your students can go ahead and chronologically go through the information all the way from introduction and see all the complexities that are happening all the way up until the conclusion. So I think that this sort of web of hierarchy, when they say hierarchy, I more so see like organization, organization and how the chronological organization affects maybe the complexities that are happening in whatever story you're reading or with whatever rhetorical approach that you're examining. And with this visual, students are able to organize that information and engage with the information by going directly to whatever comprehensive idea that they're trying to interact with or that they want to branch off of. So here is my reflection. So why is any of this significant and how could this impact our own teaching methods as future educators and in our future classrooms? So the first thing that I think is really important to emphasize here when we're considering data visualizations is that we don't want students to only consume information and learn in a two-dimensional fashion. I've mentioned this a couple times throughout the presentation, but I think it's important to also reflect upon. We don't want students to just be consuming information, sitting in their seats and not taking the information outside of the classroom door, because that doesn't impact them in any significant way. It's not engaging them in any significant way. We want students to learn and engage with the material in front of them, creating a dynamic, impactful, and long-lasting effect. So when we can get students to interact with the material that we're presenting them, they're caring about that material, they're engaging with it. And that is what's impactful and that is what's long lasting. So if we could do that by using this technique and tool of data visualizations, then we have the opportunity to provide that learning experience to students, that educational, dynamic, collaborative experience that we want to give our students. The second main point I have here is that if we can positively change the ways in which we can deliver information for students and provide opportunities for students to do the same, then we are facilitating comprehension and a deeper understanding of the material at hand in a meaningful way. And again, I want to draw upon this example that I had of literary theory and how I struggle with that personally. So if we can create an opportunity for these data visualizations to facilitate that comprehension, to engage students to deeply understand the material that's being presented to them, then it's going to impact them in a way that a block text might not. And they'll be able to understand it in a way that they might not have, or that they might be struggling with if they just have a two-dimensional text that's not engaging them, that's not activating their senses, their visual reception, their interest, really. And this material is what's creating the meaning. This way of interacting is what's creating the meaning. And the student is what's creating the meaning with this material. And that's what we want as future educators. We want our students to have this meaningful experience throughout their learning process. And if we can provide that to them through tools like data visualization, then we're creating a positive change in the classroom. All right, so I really like this video because he makes the point that data visualization can save the world. So let's go ahead and take a look at how he says data visualizations can save the world and how it can impact society and culture on the whole, not only in the classroom, but again, on that larger scale.
All right. This is home. This is us. This is where some of us live. This isn't 1,000 years from now. If you're younger, this is the world of your great-grandchildren. And this image right here in particular, given to us by worldunderwater.org, powered by Carbon Story, takes Google Street View and superimposes our climate data from earlier. But this isn't a talk about climate change. So I want you to stop, and I want you to feel what you're feeling right now at this minute. And if you have even a little anxiety about the fate of our children's futures, then you've just validated that visualization speaks to us on a deeper level, on an emotional level, one that entices us to make change happen. When we visualize data, we make it real. We pull it out of the abstract and into our hearts. And our hearts give us the reason we do what we do. Our hearts give us the why. And the why is so important. Why do you do what you do? You need to be asking yourself every day. That's so important. Data visualization gives us that why. So science and art have finally come together. It took long enough, 2015, to give us something beautiful and give us a little bit of wonder, make our lives easier, and just maybe cause you guys to want to save the world. Thanks.
Alrighty, so in this example that he gives us a living, breathing data visualization. And that is another tool that we can use when we're presenting information with our students. It doesn't always have to be the examples that I gave us. So it doesn't have to be always a word tree or a word cloud or a Venn diagram, etc. It could be a video. And again, igniting that electric experience that students have in the classroom. So speaking of electric experiences in the classroom, activity 2 is going to be a Flipgrid reaction video. So you will be making a video that is about 10 to 15 seconds long, which will showcase your reaction to Shannon F. Banning's article following the narrative using data visualizations in the composition classroom. Your reaction could be any of the following or none, just react. So some of the suggestions I had here, you could take or leave. Something you found interesting on our Jot and Jamboard, something you disagreed with in the article, any thoughts you have on the presentation, especially if certain examples stood out to you, any feelings, connections, facial expressions that you had during the reading and or presentation. Again, this is your reaction. Make sure it's true to you, authentic. I'm super excited to see how it turns out. So in order to do this, use your CSULB student email, or you can enter as a guest by using the code composition. If you do choose to enter as a guest, please write the code with an uppercase C, because that's the only way it will activate that password. So I'm gonna provide this Flipgrid link in our Zoom chat right now. So we can go ahead and pause this video and go ahead and click on the link, again, using your student email or using the code composition. Okay, welcome back. Thank you so much for creating those reaction videos. I can't wait to compile all of them. Either at the end of class, we can go ahead and watch it, or we can go ahead and view that on Tuesday as well. But in conclusion, and to really wrap up my presentation, I'd like to open the floor to any additional questions or comments that might be stirring. So we could either revisit the Jot and Jamboard if there was something that we didn't go over, or we could just go ahead and draw upon more conclusions that you found either in the later examples or in your reaction videos. So I'll go ahead and end the presentation here, and we can go ahead and have a sort of collaborative discussion about data visualizations and how you think they might be effective, ineffective, or just work in general. So let's go ahead and collaborate.